So again, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you here in this bi-monthly appointment to discuss about certification, verification, so conformity assessment, evaluation. And normally our experience is to invite a certification body, verification body, and a company to discuss about specific standards from the theoretical perspective, from the conformity assessment perspective, and then from the perspective of the company that at the end of the story is who is implementing the standard. But in January of last year, we had the first conference focused on accreditation standard. It was with Sons of Aequilibria. It was exactly to anticipate some content of the 7229. And at that time, we said that we committed to organize another further meetings after the publication of the standard to have a broader discussion with colleagues, with company, accreditation body, and to see how this kind of activity was progressing on the time. And so I'm very happy to have here today an award of ANAB and Vicenzo Miceli. And now I introduce you both better to discuss on ISO 7229 and ISO 14065. So the focus is to have an introduction on verification validation activity in environmental field, but more focus, more in detail on GHG, greenhouse gas emission. Why? Because now there is a new landscape in connection with the publication of 7229, 40064 part 3, and the 40065 under revision will be published at the end of the year. And the agenda is to have the first presentation of an award. Anne is the director of environmental accreditation programs for ANAB. Is the most important accreditation body in USA. But Anne is also the chair of the IEF working group, the International Accreditation Forum working group on greenhouse gases. After that, I will have a presentation on ISO FDs 40065 and ISO 40064/3 and the new AUP approach. For sure, we will have interesting discussion even at the end of the seminary on this specific topic. Then we will take a 30 minutes coffee break to relax, to not stay too much time in front of the screen. And then after that, we have an implementation experience from the accreditation perspective. And will be Vicenzo Miceli of Bureau Veritas Italia. He is environmental sustainability senior technical specialist and product developer. And Vicenzo will share with us the practical experience of the application of the new AUP approach, but also the experience on 40064 part 3 verification. I'm very happy that we have a lot of colleagues of accreditation body from Kazakhstan, Romania, Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, the Netherlands. So I'm sure that we have a very fruitful discussion after the presentation of Vicenzo, because this is a topic that is still under evolution. So we will present our experience, that we share with you our experience, but we expect to have at the end a very interesting discussion. So the conclusion of the day is planned for 5:30 p.m. Your time. And so I finish with my short introduction and I give the floor to Anne Howard. Really thank you, Anne, to be here today and to have the big opportunity to know your experience in your connection with these standards, ISO 7229.
Great, thanks, Daniele. Can you hear me okay now?
Very well, very well.
Great, great. So I guess I will go ahead and share my screen. Is that?
Yes, on the bottom, there's a the green link. In the center should be share screen in the bottom part of the.
Yeah, thanks. I see it. I'm just too many things open.
Don't worry, you are still at the coffee time, so we are already late, already in the afternoon.
Okay, can folks see my screen now?
Yes, if you may put in the presentation mode.
Yeah, thanks.
Now the floor is yours.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, and thanks so much to Daniele for inviting me. My background is really in the environmental sector and primarily in carbon counting, greenhouse gas accounting. So I'm coming at this primarily from a director of a program that has been active in greenhouse gas. So full disclosure, we haven't actually put 17029 out yet. We're working on it now. Also, I'm going to skip over a lot of the basics about the standard. So I'm not going to focus on, the contents of the standard itself. I'm just going to go through some of the points that I feel are more applicable to what Daniele is going to talk about, and then some of the complications that I think we're all going to have to work through as we see this additional layer of standard coming online now. So just to start out, a little bit of background. So back, 2014, 2015, there was a lot of talk about the need for consistency around the use of validation and verification. So apparently, the terms were being picked up and used in a lot of different ISO standards, and they were being used in different contexts and meaning different things. So ISO Casco said, okay, there's a real need here to try to create some consistency around validation and verification and bring it into the conformity assessment suite of standards. So in 2006, they voted to begin work on the Casco level standard for validation and verification. At that time, we already had 14065 and 14064, 1, 2, 3, 14067 were already available. So really, those standards, especially 14065, offered the most practical experience in terms of what actually were the process steps of validation and verification, and what were the key terms used in validation and verification. So when we say, when we talk about 17029, we talk about claims. The standard uses the word claim. And a claim is may also be called a statement, a declaration, an assertion, a prediction, or a report. And it's distinguished by the timeline of the assessed claim, meaning that validation is applied to a future use or projected outcome, and verification applies to events that have already occurred or events that have already been, results that have already been obtained. And the idea here is to give assurance, confidence to stakeholders in the credibility of a claim. And that claim would be around certain parameters. So the object of validation verification is to evaluate the claim, make a decision on the confirmation of the claim to specified requirements. Does a claim conform with specified requirements? And then is it general or detailed? And then at the end of the validation verification process, a statement or an opinion is issued. And that opinion is depending on the type of claim, can be worded either in the positive or in the negative. Or it can also be worded to say that nothing was discovered, nothing was discovered that would lead the verifier or validator to question the credibility of the claim. Or if it was a positive, reasonable assurance, it would say, that the statement can be verified to a reasonable level of assurance, and that's based on the data provided during the assessment. This is the table of contents. As you can see, the table of contents looks a lot similar to other Casco level documents, with the exception, of course, of primarily section 8 and 9, and then the annexes, of course. So sections 8 and 9 are going to get into those processes that are much more akin to what you see in 1465 and 64-3. Annex A has elements of validation verification programs. It's informative, but the authors of the standard felt that they had to spell out some minimum requirements for the program, and that's because in 17029 the program is it takes so much importance because the standard is very flexible in its approach. So a claim is defined in 17029 as information declared by the client. So again, this could be any number of things. A claim could be, just brainstorming. It could be a claim that a lender is a fair lender. It could be a claim that a certain product has been is conflict free. Say if it's some kind of gemstone or something like that, it could get into those types of claims. Ethical claims. It could also be related to what we know, which is greenhouse gas. So in that case, it's in the 1465 part of our world, we say statement. Does the statement match the regulatory requirements or the voluntary requirements of the program? And the claim is the object of the validation and verification. And the claim can represent a situation at a point in time, or it can cover a period of time. One example of this is when we go out to verify a project, a greenhouse gas reduction project. We would be looking at a monitoring period. So we would be looking at, say, 18 months of data over the lifetime of this project, and that would be the period of time that we would be then verifying to ensure that the offsets achieved by that carbon reduction project achieved a reasonable level of assurance. Now, the claim can be clearly identifiable, must be clearly identifiable and capable of consistent evaluation. And I think that's probably where we're going to have lots of discussion about whether or not a claim is actually capable of consistent evaluation. And the claim can be provided in the form of a report, a statement, a declaration, a project plan, or consolidated data. One thing to note here is that with the introduction of these standards and 14064-3/2019 is that the term agreed upon procedures is also introduced as a possible path to issuing an opinion. And the 17029 defines report as a statement of factual findings, and that is the output of a AUP, as it's called, which I think Daniele is going to talk a little bit about some of the complexities that brings with it. So everyone on the call probably knows this well, but just to revisit it, validation is confirmation of a claim of the provision of objective evidence that the requirements for a specified intended future use or application have been fulfilled. In other words, the confirmation of plausibility. So if we look at historical data for how a wind installation performs, if we look to see that wind installation is funded based on credible data, that it would not have been funded anyway in the absence of the project. We can look at some historical data to make a informed opinion about future performance, and that's what validation is. So we can look at that project and look at similar pieces of data from other projects, and then we can model, we can make some opinions about the future of that project. So that's validation, and that's forward looking. And then verification is where you're going back. So after the project has been validated, the project is going to go through a period of monitoring its performance. The VVB would come back at that point and look at how that project has performed over a specified period of time. So did the intended results actually occur? Were the GHG emission reductions achieved? And what were they achieved to a certain level of assurance? It's important to note that 17029 is not intended for the following. It's not intended for suppliers' declaration of conformity. It's not intended for verification in the context of inspection activities or as a part of testing, inspection, certification, and design validation verification as per ISO 9001. So the principles of the validation verification process are that it's based on evidence, the evidence is sufficient and appropriate, documentation, the VVB will establish the basis for conclusion and decision regarding the conformity of the claim, and fair presentation. The requirements are generic in 17029, and this is one of the things that I feel is going to be most important about 17029, is that it is going to be supplemented by a program, a validation verification program. And those requirements are really going to specify the rules, the procedures, the criteria for carrying out a validation and verification in a specific sector. So if we look at some examples, and I'll talk about some examples we're seeing later on, one of the areas that we're looking into developing a new program in is plastics. So if you look at plastics, first you have to look at, like, well, what's a claim under plastics? So a claim under plastics could be a certain amount of plastics have been removed from the disposal process over a period of time. So that would then become the program requirement. The program would have to be specifying those specific rules for how that's going to be done. And the program will describe the additional requirements for validation described in the annex. So, we're going to be looking at things like, what is the level of assurance? Maybe in certain programs, it's going to be a limited level of assurance. Maybe in other programs, it'll be reasonable. Some, it could be absolute, but I think that will be rare. And some could be, a combination or a mixed engagement, where part of the data can be assured to a reasonable level of assurance, and part of the data can only be assessed against agreed upon procedures. So we're going to see a lot more nuances in how these programs, kind of pick and pull what different pieces can be validated or verified against. This shows where the new standard sits within the Casco toolbox. So, of course, we all know 17,011, which is the requirements for us accreditation bodies. And then we have requirements for testing in laboratories, inspection bodies, and then the new VVBs. So previously we had requirements for certification bodies, and then management systems, products, persons, and now you have this additional validation verification which until 17029 used to sit primarily in all those different standards, but primarily as we know it in 14065, which was a joint effort between Casco and ISO TC 207 for climate change. The standard describes level of assurance as a degree of confidence in the claim. There's a note that reads, the level of assurance and the conditions to achieve them can be defined in a program. This is what I was saying earlier, can be absolute, reasonable, limited, and the level of assurance sets the stage for the conduct of the validation verification. So when you set out and you do a verification, typically if you said, you know, we're going to do this to a reasonable level of assurance, and you got quarter way down into the engagement and you found that the level of assurance couldn't be achieved, you wouldn't be able to just switch now to limited level of assurance. You would have to rethink your approach and then go back and start. You may have to start over again. So level of assurance doesn't really work like, you know, you can just change as you go through. You have to know what you're looking at before you're going to do it and be well prepared in how you're going to meet that level of assurance. I think I already described the different levels of assurance, but just to review them again, reasonable means reasonable but not absolute level of assurance that the claim is materially correct. Limited involves less testing of data and information. So an example of this could be if it was a large corporate inventory and the corporation had lots of different sites all over the world. For a reasonable level of assurance, you would be required to look at all the emission sources and visit, you know, physically you'd be carrying out a site visit for the ones that were higher risk, or, you know, maybe the more complex emission types, process emissions, or just the high emitting facilities in that inventory. For limited, you could do less of that testing. And you'd be focused more on the controls. So you'd be focused more on how does corporate really control all of that data, and you would have, it would be a less intensive engagement. And agreed upon procedures is basically where no assurance can be provided. And this is why it results in a report of factual findings, because you're simply saying, based on the procedure that company A said it was going to follow, it appears that that's what they did. VBBs can undertake mixed engagements, like I said, where they can pick and choose from these. And that's going to come into play, especially on some types of validations, where you might have pieces of information that are based on historical performance for a certain technology type, where maybe you can get a reasonable level of assurance, and then other aspects of that project where you won't be able to provide assurance, where you have to use agreed upon procedures. Section 17029 defines material as significant to intended users. And materiality is the concept that misstatements, either individually or in aggregate, can influence the reliability of a claim or decisions made by the intended user. And materiality can be qualitative or quantitative. Types of material discrepancy. Incomplete identification of source data, inappropriate baseline selected, selection of improper quantification methods, and failure to meet mandatory requirements of standards or programs. So when we see material discrepancies in under 14065, typically what we've seen have been, misapplied conversion factors, things like incorrect calculations, adding of decimal points, even some transcription errors that start at the inventory compilation level, and then, if not caught, can easily lead to material discrepancy. Current examples of applicability for 14065 and 64-3. These are the current examples that most of us ABs are going to have coming in with 17029. And 14065 and 64-3 are used in voluntary reporting, 64-3 being used in programs like the Corporate Disclosure Project, Global Reporting Initiative, etc., on a voluntary basis. Programs like the Climate Registry, which is a voluntary greenhouse gas reporting program. On the mandatory side, we have a number of regulatory programs that, mandate the third-party verification of a greenhouse gas statement to 14065 and 64-3. And those typically will cap emissions at a certain level, and any facility emitting over that level will have to disclose their emissions and then undergo a third-party verification. And there are a number of these globally now, many carbon programs globally. So it's very important, that we also don't lose sight of 14065 and the importance that it's played in creating those markets and that conformity assessment aspect of those markets. And carbon footprint and scope 3 reporting are also part of the current 14065 and 14064-3. So when we think about how 17029 may be used, it could be used for things like corporate environmental reporting, corporate sustainability reports. I'm hearing a lot about it being used in terms of like data aggregation. Most of my examples, by the way, are still going to be referencing 14065, so I need to make that clear. Data aggregation, what this is there can be a number of different, I'll call them agricultural projects, where they're doing certain land use practices to reduce the emissions associated with that land. But that parcel of land on its own is not, it's not enough really to bother with undergoing verification and reporting, because the amount of potential credits would be so small. So now we see a lot of smaller agricultural projects being grouped together, self-reporting their data, and then a verification body would come in and look at the aggregated data, look at all the data roll up, and then create an evidence-based sampling plan on that and go through the process of verifying that data. Other types of environmental information, there are a number of standards being developed within TC 207, one of which is a water verification standard currently. So we expect to see it used in that space. Water disclosure, water savings, even potentially like water trading programs, which exist. Plastics, things like plastic crediting programs. Companies who produce a lot of plastic waste want to reduce their waste. They want to have that verified, and then they want the ability to potentially even have crediting mechanisms like in the carbon markets, where they can trade off different advantages and disadvantages. Social responsibility and safeguards. This is already happening under 14065 with some of the standards like the the Vera programs for Red Plus and biodiversity and social safeguards being built into those forest programs. Gold Standard, another program that has safeguards and social responsibility and even economic outcomes weaved into it. Financial information and debt financing. Again, there's standards underway for green debt financing within ISO TC 207 right now. Bond issuance is one of the areas where it could be used. A bond increasingly wants to be rated as either green or not green. So if a bond issuer wants to make the claim that, this bond is only used to finance sustainable activities, then that would require a verification body to come in and look at whether or not that the use of proceeds are actually being used on those green projects, that they're not being used for things that are non-green. Artificial intelligence and IT, and this is more just 17029 without 14065, and potentially food-related claims. I'm just throwing that out there. Some of you on the call may know more, but I'm hearing a lot about this too, that it could be used for things like, verified non-GMO, verified, sustainable source, things like that. And I'm sure there are more examples. The transition for the standards. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about that. So 14065 is out there. We all know it. It's being revised. I think Daniele is going to talk a little bit about that. It's expected to be published, I think, late this year or early 2021, around that time frame. IAF, which is the membership group of accreditation bodies, passed a resolution in 2019 that we would have 3 years from the date of publication. So when that standard is published, we have 3 years to transition. And in that transition, we're also going to then bring in 17029 at that time. So if an ANAB accredited verification body transitions to 14065, we'll call it 2021 version. When ANAB does the assessment, we're going to carry it out to, eventually when they transition, 17029 plus 14065 2021 plus 14064 Part 3 2019. And then all of those standards are going to be on the certificate. So that's one of the sort of complicating factors here, because until now, all we have to do is put 14065 on the certificate and the scopes and activities, and we're done. But now we have to put 17029 on there, and we also have to put 64-3 on there, 2019 version, because in my mind, the link is not as strong as it was before with the 2013 version of 14065, which clearly linked 64-3 as a normative reference. So there's going to be a lot of I think the transition will go fine, but I think there's going to have to be a lot more dialogue about how we approach this and how does a regulator deal with this. A regulator, for example, who has 14065 written into their regulation, do they need to change that? Do they need to now say 17029? I think all of that has to still be worked out. Trying to go ahead and my slides won't advance now. Okay, so this is a quick example of a program that came up recently, so I just wanted to give a tangible example here. So increasingly, all of these sustainability programs are getting linked, right? So people don't want to recreate the wheel if it already exists. So if we have a national clean fuel regulation, let's say a country wants to put in place a program that's going to incentivize the use of low carbon fuel. They write, regulations, they put it out there. In the regulation, they can say that in order to qualify for a credit for clean fuel, low carbon fuel, you have to have the fuel certified firstly through one of the approved sustainability certification schemes. And they may even be able to say CORSIA, right, approves certification schemes. CORSIA is the international arrangement for reducing airline emissions. So the ICAO is going to approve both carbon offset providers and sustainable fuel certifiers and put them up on their website as approved for the purposes of the CORSIA program, right? But now another program might be able to say, okay, well, I can just reference what they've done already and say, we're also going to recognize those sustainable fuel schemes for our own national goal. And then in that framework, the accreditation body is working with the sustainability certification scheme to accredit bodies to 17065. And that can include things like, the sustainability requirements for the biomass production and chain of custody. But then on top of that, because the clean fuel regulation really wants to get at, is it a low carbon fuel? They can then layer on top of that program a verification component and say, also the emissions, the emission intensity from the fuel stock needs to undergo a third-party verification, and it has to be to a reasonable level of assurance. So then you have, it's kind of like a layered approach. So you have the certification already happening to look at things like, were the sustainability requirements of the scheme met? Was there any mixing, or is the chain of custody coming through clean? And then on top of it, and if you want to qualify for this other program over here, this national clean fuel regulation, you need to then report the emissions intensity of the feedstock so that we can then try to calculate the emissions from the fuel source and give crediting under our program. This is like a very new kind of thing, but I'm just throwing it out there because I think it's going to bring up some questions into terms of where do things fall. And I apologize for this very busy next slide. But this is actually Daniele and I brainstorming on how we could try to create something that would help a user decide what standard to use, right? Because in the previous example, when we're having these discussions, my instinct is always, well, can't we just put it under one standard to make it easy? But it's not going to be so easy. So if it is based on historical information, or if it's used to project future outcomes, and if a program exists, then most likely it's going to be a form of validation verification, and then you would use 17029. If it's a new scope, not covered under 14065, we may see a new type of sector standard develop there, right? So for ethical claims, for example. Then if it's related to environmental information, we could have 14017 or some other validation verification process. That's the example given for water. If it's related to GHG information, then we do the same thing we've been doing, but we have to tack on 17029. And then up here, if the answer is no, then it goes to another CASCO level standard, being the idea. but I was thinking about this recently, and it could be like the previous example that I gave, which hopefully made some sense, is that if it's based on historical information, which emission intensity of a feedstock would be, then do you, and there are other aspects that are being picked up in the sustainability, that are related to product certification, you really have to use both, I think. So that's creating some complexity in terms of how we design an accreditation program, right? So how do we then design that program so that it's not clunky? It's not going to be, very expensive for conformity assessment bodies to get through that process if they want to do both of those things under that sort of program within a program, if you will. Also, how do we make sure that we're getting at the right stuff? I mean, in terms of validation and verification, what we really want to know is the VVB competent, and are they getting at the right things? Are they getting at the right things so that we get the right result, so that the right data is going to the right stakeholder? That's, the most important thing. And then also, all of these programs and under 17029 are going to have, lots of different nuances. And that's going to present a big challenge, I think, to the accreditation community in terms of how we harmonize to each other. Because if I see, something and it's a new type of program, maybe I design it much differently than a different AB. Or maybe we look at things like agreed upon procedures. Maybe we look at that very differently. So I think harmonization is going to be a journey on this. And, that's why at IEF here next month in October, the IEF Technical Committee will be meeting, and they'll be discussing some of the recommendations put forth by our working group. One of which is that we need to form some small task forces to look at whether or not additional guidance around the implementation of 17029 and the new 14065 are going to be necessary to help conformity assessment bodies and ABs harmonize their systems. So hopefully that work will be moving forward in the next few months. And also we'll be launching, I hope, we'll be launching a survey to learn more about what other, all the different countries are seeing in terms of new requests for use of 17029, so we can try to get a better idea of exactly how is it being used. Are there instances where it's being misapplied, and what can we do to make sure that it's being used in the correct fashion, and that it's really going to create the best outcome for stakeholders. Those are just some considerations I threw out there. So I think that's all I had, and wanted to kind of start the conversation there and see what people had to say or what concerns others are hearing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Really very interesting presentation. And I also have some note to facilitate the discussion, but we postpone everything in the last part of the meeting. For the moment, I take two important words in your presentation, is complexity and harmonization. So the complexity is the starting problem, because you mentioned that there is now a new animal in the zoo, or Isocasco Zoo. Now we have a new conformity assessment activity broader than only GHG. And the need of harmonization is another key word. So really, thank you for your presentation. And now I will share with you some experience, some aspect in connection with the 14065 revision and the 14064-3, but in particular focusing on the new AUP approach. So the idea is to have a general framework and then move to the ISO FTS 14065. then 64-3, and finally AUP in the carbon footprint of product and of organization context. So this is in some way a different way to explain what just unpresent has, because we saw that there are some part of requirement for the verification and validation body, for the body. And we may recognize the first part here, the generic standard 7229 for verification validation, and then 40 or 65 in the new version we will explain later with the expanded scope. So in some way, here are both body requirements. Then we move to another level, is the process requirement for verification and validation. And then we have 64-3 in the case of greenhouse gases, but we may have other standard for the water information, other footprint, adaptation mitigation, but environmental report verification. So, or green bond. Here we have the process requirement describing how to perform the verification validation. And then finally here, we have the standard for the organization, for the company, related to the information and data that need to be evaluated. So 64-1 already mentioned, 67 for the product verification, account corsia, and so on. So you may see by this picture how is the important interaction between different standards. And this is only the starting point in terms of complexity. What is the landscape at the moment? We have the ISO IEC 7229 already published in October 2019. We have ISO 4065 under revision. FDS is on the balloting now. And then, if not wrong, the closing of the balloting is in October. And the expected publication time is in the winter 2020-2021. So it will be the end of the year or the beginning of the next year. Depends on the time for ISO Central Secretariat to fix all the editorial things. And then we have 64-3 published in April 2019. We have a picture in Accredia because Accredia participated to the development and revision of all of these standards. This is the last meeting of 7229 in the Milan office. Only to stress that me and Carla, that is here present today, were directly involved in this process. And Anna show us the resolution from transition arrangement for 4065, but it's also important to see the 64-3 transition period, because we have 4 years of transition period starting from the 30th April 2019, that obviously will finish in 30th April 2023. So the idea to have 4 years for 64-3 and 3 years for 65 was to try to align the conclusion of transition period more or less at the same time, try to facilitate this harmonization. Obviously, it's not possible to see the future, like in the validation, so it's not possible to give assurance to the future. So there will be some months of difference, but it's not so big a difference. So I repeat, the idea was to align the transition period of 64-3 and 65. But what is important here for the accreditation body is the need to be ready to carry out the 40 or 65 assessment using 64-3 2019 by the 30 October 2020. So next month, the accreditation body needs to be ready to issue accreditation using 64-3 in the new version. And I'm sure that we have some maybe discussion at the end of the presentation on this specific point. So 40 or 65 is really the first standard. I'm speaking on the version 2007. The first standard speaking on verification and validation. It was in connection with the greenhouse gases, because the scope was specified principle and the requirements for bodies performing validation and verification of greenhouse gas information statement. So the focus was very clearly only on GHG. But then in April 2015, it was proposed to extend the scope not only to GHG, but to all environmental information. If I'm not wrong, was a proposal by US and Korea, was ANSI and CATS, the Korean accreditation body, if not wrong, to have this extension of scope. And in June 2017, the process started. But now we have, in the last 2 years, we had in parallel the development of 7129 and development of 4265. So you may imagine how difficult it was to keep consistency in this process and how will be the complexity now with the future accreditation activities. As already mentioned before, the last balloting will be will end October to the 21st of October, sorry. So the publication is expected between the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. Okay, 64 part 3. We need to start with some inconsistency. You know, 64 part 3 was published, was under development in advance the 7029, and the definition of the objective verification and validation in 40,064-3 is statement. So the GHG statement is what the company is producing for carbon footprint of product, carbon footprint organization, and so on. The output of the verification body, the verification validation activity, is the opinion here. The point is that the 7129 use a different terminology and use claim as object of the verification validation, even if in the notes allow to use statement for this object of verification validation. And finally, the output of the verification validation activity is a statement. And here is one part of the problem, because we have the same terms with completely different things. Sorry, my mouse is going around the screen. Because statement is the output in the context of 7229, but is the object, so the input for the verification and validation in 64-3. And already show you this picture that is part of 7229. Is very clear because the validation is looking in the future and verification is looking on the past. But I want to stress something more in connection with the definition. In my view, is my personal view, the definition of 7229 is more ambiguous, and the definition in 40,064-3 is really more clear, in my view. We already clarified that historical data is fundamental for verification, but what is missing, in my view, in the definition of verification in 7229 is the materially correct, that the statement has to be materially correct, because it's only request that the claim is conformed to criteria. We have a long discussion. There was somebody said that was that implies that conform to criteria also means to be materially correct. But in my view, to have this kind of clear double focus on materially correct and conform to criteria, I believe it gives a lot of more clarity. And the other definitions of validation is in connection with the reasonableness of assumption, limitation, and methods. So the focus is not directly to the result of the project, for example, but the focus is if the development of the project is performed in a correct way. So if the assumption, limitation, and methods used to develop the project are supporting the outcome of future activities. Anne already explained the meaning of assurance and the level of assurance. We have maybe a small little different definition, but the meaning is the same. But the key point, in my view, is that in 40,064-3 and then in 40,065, is clearly defined, clearly expressed, that assurance is only provided on historical information. It's not possible to provide assurance in the future. So validation does not provide assurance. And this is another point where, in my view, 7229 is not so clear. And also clarify the importance to have a program for a full implementation of 7229 and the 40,064-3 and 65 at the same time. And but having more programs also imply having more definition of the different level of output. And if you look in the standard, there is these 4 possibilities. So this is not in reality an opinion, because disclaimer issuance of an opinion is not an opinion. But in reality, these 3 types, unmodified, modified, adverse, are the possible output following the standard. But then in the annex, we have different kind of classification of the definition. So the same level, unmodified could be unqualified, could be positive in other case, could be satisfactory, could be positive. So for example, UATS, this is the most important mandatory program in Europe, use satisfactory with comments, unsatisfactory. But if you move to CDM, they have positive or negative. So there are different possibilities to explain the same concept described in the standard. And then there is a UP, that is a type of engagement when is not required assurance on the GG statement. So what is required is a qualified verifier able to test specific aspects of a subject using verification techniques. So the techniques is similar, but the purpose of the activity is not to express assurance, it's not to have an opinion as output, but to test specific aspects on the G statement. And then there is another important things in the standard, is the mixed engagement, already announced by Anne in her presentation, because 64-3 specified that it's allowed to establish mixed engagement combining validation, verification, and agreed upon procedure. We did the same engagement. So now is the time to see this very interesting, in my view, and innovative conformity assessment activity. And I start with specific experience of carbon footprint of product. And one important point is that in the 67 is clear that all the emission happening during the life cycle of a product is calculated as emitted at the point 0 of the study. So, for example, if we have a battery production, then we have an extraction of raw material, and we may consider, I don't know, that, for example, the raw material is started 2 years ago. And then this battery will be used for 8 years. So we don't know how will be the scenarios for the downstream, for the disposal of or recovering of the battery in 8 years from now, so with the very important evolution that is happening in this period. So it's not reasonable, it's not correct to think what may happen in the future. So we consider what is the scenario today, to the end of life scenario for the battery today. In some way, we are taking this, here it is, we are taking this situation and we are putting the situation at the moment 0. And the same with the raw material extraction. So the time dimension is reduced to moment 0. So if there is no future, there is no validation. So validation is not applicable. Then the only possible solution for carbon footprint of product is to use a mixed engagement between verification and AUP. And now we see some practical example. We have here a system, a tool to clean an hospital, for example, a hospital surface. So it's made by plastic. And if you look at the impact in terms of CO2 of this product in the, from cradle to gate, from the structural material until the gate of the company, you see that the main part of the impact is in connection with the plastic production. But this is a very stable process. So we have a lot of information, data, reliable data. And then considering that there is not a lot of variability in this kind of activity, it's possible to say that all this activity may be carried out with assurance. So we may have a full verification with all the information upstream and all information in the core. Different situation, so in this case, because as I mentioned before, the indirect emission derived from plastic, mainly from plastic polymer upstream production, so that there is very important, good, high data quality. It's completely different situation of a tannery company, where if you look at the impact of a leather, the impact is mainly in connection with the cattle of the cow. And you know, the problem is that the company here has an only interface, the slaughter. As the slaughter has not information, does not give information on how the cow is cattled. We don't know if there is a deforestation in Amazon forest, or if there is very, very good high performance management of the manure, for example. We don't have any idea. So we need to follow only what is specified by the PCR, as we see later. And in this case, it's not possible to have a level of assurance of the information in connection with the cow. So we have a level of assurance of information in connection with the core process, but we need to apply another approach, the AUP approach for the upstream. What is the difference at the end? That also in this case, we have a final result here, but this final result is a combination of one part where we have assurance, because we know very well the information, and then it is possible to express assurance in this condition, and one part where we express AUP, that is here. Obviously, there's a mistake here. Is okay, we delete the downstream. It's not the point. Okay. So another information, how you allocate the impact of the cattle of the cow. This is another point. And here we have the PCR giving strictly rules on how we have this kind of allocation. So the activity of the verifier in this case is to check if the company is following correctly the PCR. It's not possible to express assurance on the data, but it's needed to check if the PCR is correctly implemented. And then we have another example here. On carbon footprint of organization. We have production of aluminum can, and here the large majority of the impact is in connection with the metal melting, the upstream, that are also in this case characterized by high quality data. Therefore, assurance can be provided in this case. But we may understand that the situation is absolutely different if we see a large-scale distribution, for example, like Walmart. In this case, we have the large amount of impact connected with the transportation of the clients. So it's our car. When we go to shop to Walmart, is the most important emission, GHG emission sources for the Walmart. So it's very interesting. But at the same time, you may understand that it's not possible to express any kind of assurance on the data, how Walmart model the GHG emission. how they combine, how they calculate the emission in connection with the different car we use, different distances, and so on. So even in this case, it's not possible to express assurance, and then we need to implement the AUP. So we need to combine, we need to have a mixed engagement where one part is under assurance, another part is shall be verified using AUP. So I finished my presentation. If it's okay for you, I suggest to have the break now, a coffee break, and maybe we may spend 20 minutes instead of 30 minutes, and reconvene you in 20 minutes. It's 4:30 CET time, so 20 minutes from now. If you have a question, even during the presentation of Vicenzo later, you may use the chat, or you may raise your hand, that we may take note of the list of people that want to comment or raise some question during the discussion time. So for the moment, thank you everybody, and see you in 20 minutes. Okay, we start again, and we have now Vicenzo. Vicenzo, as already anticipated before, works for Veritas Italia. Vicenzo Miceli, sorry, because also surname is important. And I'm very happy to have him here because Veritas Italia is one of the first, or maybe the first, but I don't know, for sure one of the first verification body in Italy that start to use the AUP approach. So I'm sure that we will have a very valuable experience, very valuable feedback from here during his presentation. So Vicenzo, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, Daniele, I will share my screen. I hope you can see it.
Perfect. If you may put the presentation mode.
Okay. You can see the presentation, Daniele, sorry?
Yes, if you may put in the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Daniele. Good afternoon to everybody. And Daniele, thank you for your invitation and for giving me also the opportunity to share with you Bureau Veritas experience about IUP application and to show with you also part of Bureau Veritas process about IUP application. So how we saw before just with Daniele and also Anne, IUP is a news of the last version of ISO 14064 part 3 of April 2019, if I remember good. So let's see together very quickly the verification process of ISO 14064 part 3. So the first step is the pre-engagement activity, where agreement with the client on type of engagement, level of assurance, objectives, criteria, scope, and the materiality thresholds. The second step is selection of a verification team. The third step, maybe one of the most important steps, is perform the strategic analysis, perform the risk assessment, develop verification plan, and develop evidence gathering plan. Of course, we have the execution of the verification activities. So conduct the verification according to the verification plan, conduct the evidence gathering activity according to evidence gathering plan, assess changes to the GNG statement. Completion of the verification activities, so evaluate the GNG statement and the verification report, and independent review. The last part is the issue, the opinion. So, how I told before, the IUP is an opportunity of the last 14064 part 3, and we can find it in the Annex C. So let's see together in general what's about we are talking. We are talking about a type of engagement used when the intended user not require assurance on the GNG statement, but require a qualified verifier to assess aspects of a subject using verification technique. The RP engagement may be more or less extensive than verification. The RP need to be documented. The verifier provides to report only on the results of the IUP, and no opinion is expressed. The intended user assess the results of the activities and draw the conclusion. The reports contains the IUP and the results. Let's see together the part of our process when we can use IUP and how we can use it. How we know we are in the beginning of this application. So I think how Daniele told before, we are maybe one of the first verification body to apply IUP in Italy. Until now, we apply it after specific request from our clients. So it's not arrived from us, the application of IUP procedure. How? Following the consultation with our national accreditation body in experimental way, and also following the Italian program operator for carbon footprint Italy. Agreed upon procedure are all used with verification activities. So this type of engagement can be applied to GNG program that specify IUP rather than assurance, specific in indirect emission and removes, for example, indirect emissions in the GNG inventory, category 3, 4, 5, 6, or upstream emission and removals from product life cycle, how Daniele showed before to us. Compliance to specifications and GNG information and data management and controls. Let's see together the picture from Annex C about the IUP process. So we can see 4 most important phases and 1 optional. So I want to show to you how we built our own process about IUP application. So we have the pre-engagement activities, where the first step is to confirm the rules and the responsibility agreement with clients. So define type of engagement. Of course, in that case, we are speaking about a mixed engagement. So verification plus IUP. Define boundary of each engagement. For example, category 1 and category 2 in verification engagement, and all indirect emission in IUP engagement. Define the appropriate methodology used, and define the results obtained from execution of each type of engagement. Of course, the second step is to select a verification team. Agreements with the intended use about the procedures to be performed. So we are speaking about planning phases. So the procedures to be performed, obtained from the intended use agreement on IUP procedures. The verifier shall not perform IUP engagement where the client is not agree on the procedures. The criteria used to determine results. So the concept of materiality is not defined in IUP engagement. Let's see an appropriate IUP application. So execution of assembling technique after agreeing on relevant parameters, inspection of specified documents evidencing types of measurements, confirmation of specific information with third party, comparison of documents, performance of specific procedure on work performed by others, performance of mathematical computation. The verifier shall obtain evidence from applying the IUP. The verifier shall not issue an opinion on evidence gathering activity or type of engagement. The verifier reports all findings from application of IUP. More finding can be reached also from and after the independent review process. Let's see together which kind of benefit we can have after the applying of this kind of process. So transparency on results when it's not possible to set a materiality threshold, transparency about data quality, and possibility of performing activities such as confirmation of specific information or comparison of documents with specified attributes without the need of defining a level of assurance. I want to give to you, and maybe we can speak after this presentation, a talking point. If we can use IUP, if you think if we can use IUP for example, part of GHG statements that are relevant. For example, if you have 94, 95% of indirect emission, we can use in this part of verification, the IUP process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincenzo, for your presentation. A lot of concept, a lot of experience in this presentation. I hope that you stimulate some question in other colleagues of a verification body or accreditation body. And if I want to take one word of your presentation, I remember before I said complexity and harmonization was the key words in my view of the presentation of Anne. I would say that you stressed in your last slide the term transparency of result and transparency of data quality. And then I believe that is a really an important point. It maybe could be a potential add value on the development of mixed engagement on the market. Okay, now I will ask you if you would like to turn on your video so we may see each other on face, because now we are in the final part of this meeting, and where I hope that we have an exchange of view and a question, free discussion. Okay, turn off the microphone if you don't need to speak, as I've already done until now. And if you want to raise your hand in the participant list, or if you write your question on the Zoom chat, that could be another option. I see colleagues that are turned on the screen. I see Liliana from Romania. Good afternoon, Sergio from Costa Rica, and other colleagues, also Marius from Costa Rica, other Italian colleagues, Carla from Credia, and then we see later if the other colleagues will decide to switch on the, Maureen also. Good afternoon, Maureen. Okay, who wants to be the first? Is always the most difficult question. Who wants to open the discussion? It's always difficult to be the first. Okay, I launch a question to Anne, because I promised that I will ask something in connection with the IFMD6 and the potential revision. So in some way still under discussion if the MD6 will be expanded to all 65 activities, so all environmental information, or even further in direction of 7229. So what is your idea, what is your feeling, and what is your idea even in terms of when this revision will be available?
Sure, I mean, I can't, it's difficult to answer when the IF technical committee hasn't reviewed the recommendations of the working group yet. They'll do that October 30th. So it's up to them if they approve the work plan of the validation verification working group, which is the group within the International Accreditation Forum that works on 14065 and now 17029. But I can say that the recommendation coming out of the working group meeting is that we form a task force to look at MD6, and one, to look at MD6 in terms of if we still need MD6, and two, if we still need MD6, what revisions need to be made in light of the revised 14065 and 64-3 2019. That's one.
So if I
Second,
only to remark your point, Anna. So in some way, all the roads are open this moment. Yes, or not for MD6, and if yes, the potential different scope. Okay, good point. And sorry.
And I think, I mean, my opinion is that you're going to need some guidance. So my feeling is that when the task group looks at this, they'll say, well, okay, we now have agreed upon procedures being the prominent example today. Maybe we need to put in some parameters around how we're going to be looking at the application of agreed upon procedures. The other issue we might need to clarify is, and I don't know, the programs may do this themselves, but the other thing that's sticking in my mind is up until now, validation statements have had a reasonable level of assurance on them for projects. And this is true in programs like American Carbon Registry and Vera. So now those programs and all of us will have to go back and think, what are those validation statements going to look like now? Are they going to be, as Vincenzo laid out, maybe they could be mixed engagements. Sort of my opinion is that there can be aspects of a validation that are based on historical data that you may be able to get reasonable assurance on, especially if it's one of the projects that's based on, sort of historical data on technological performance. So the MD discussion, one, they could decide it's not necessary, right? So they could just say, scrap it, we don't need MD6. We have everything we need. I don't think that's going to happen because we've introduced more complexity. The second one is on 17029, and that's a separate conversation. And my understanding was that the working group wanted to go out to stakeholders and see what types of new types of validation verification were being asked for under 17029, and then based on what they hear, decide if maybe there's going to be a new MD necessary for 17029. So you could end up with another MD on 17029. I don't know. I don't see that for a while. The more immediate thing is to look at both MD6 and then, of course, MD14, which is for the ABs.
So you underline a third possible road. So we say no MD6, and now we have our two MD6, one for 14065, one for 7229. So it's another possibility at the moment open on the table. Yeah,
the consideration was first you look at MD6 right now and decide you still need to keep MD6 now because it's being used in programs now, like ICAO Corsia, for example. So you can't just get rid of it, but you look at it and say, is it going to work for what we have now? If no, then maybe we edit it, and then we keep the old revision around until such time as those programs transition. But for 17029, I think that's going to be a longer discussion, and it could very well be that if you edit MD6, eventually, if you do it right, you don't need another MD for 17029 because 14065 contains 17029, right?
But sorry to interrupt you, but the real problem is that in 14065, in GAG, we have a lot of experience through all the world. In 729, there is not experience. There is some idea. It's difficult to write an MD6 on something where you don't have experience.
Yeah, yeah.
One important point, you mentioned that something is needed because also we need to have a consistent implementation of some new activity like AUP. And I believe that a good communication is very important in terms to support the harmonization. Because now we have some accreditation bodies started to work in this direction. And in my view, it's fundamental that this kind of working group, with also the opportunity to share experience, but with the idea of the communication to the market. Because maybe there are other accreditation bodies waiting to have somebody sharing experience. Okay, I have one more question to Anne, but before to raise this question, please, who want to
Yes, Daniele, Angelo speaking.
Oh, ciao Angelo, ciao.
I like to I have a question for Anne about the flow chart, and you shown in your presentation a useful flow chart for the determination of accreditation. And if I correctly understood, I saw that the 4065 is mentioned both for the claim for environmental information and into the claim related to GHG information. So I would like a clarification about, because I know that the 4065 in general is related to the greenhouse gas validation verification, and for this same. And so why is mentioned also into your flow chart into the claim related to environmental information? There is a specific reason for that? Thank you for your reply.
You're muted.
Mute. Yeah. Maybe I'm trying to see if I can pull up the. I can't seem to pull it up anymore. I don't know why. I can't seem to get it up. Pull it up, the slide that he's referring to.
If you like, I may share this one that is the same concept. If you want to express
it. Yeah. So the question was, why did we repeat environmental information? Was that the?
Yes, the question is because the 4065 is mentioned both into the environmental claim and the GHG claim.
Okay, so this is just to show that it would be still used for GHG, where it's been used now for over 10 years. And that it could potentially be used for new types of environmental information because it's being expanded to these new types of environmental aspects. So it's just to show a new kind of like a new child in the lineage. I don't know if that makes sense.
Angelo, the point is that the new 4065 has an extension of scope.
Yeah, in fact, I don't know the new. Sorry,
no,
the new 40.
No problem. The point is an extension of scope. So when it will be published in 2020, 2021, will be applicable for all environmental information. So this one is one part of the complexity, because until now we had experience only here on GHG. Now we have a double complexity. From one side, we have all other environmental information. And from another point of view, we have another relationship between 65 and 7429. So in the past, we were in our corner, relaxed, 65, 64.3, everything was clear. Now we have extension of scope, activity, and another standard on the top. And this is the point of complexity. I don't know if it's clear the
Yeah,
equation.
it's clear. It's clear. The reason is the extension of scope to all claim, environmental and GHG.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other, let me interrupt here. Any other question?
Hi.
I'm Marilys.
Hi. I was checking the the scopes. How do you think the accreditation bodies? I mean, thinking about the level 3 accreditation standard, level 4, which we see 14063 part 3, and then there's level 5 that it could be like Corsia. With this new and lots of complexity and standards and everything, how do you see the accreditation scope being presented to the BBBs? Like, do we have to make that like a difference between let's say that the IOP, or is something that it can be like take out? I don't know. And so they're gonna be thinking about GHG. They're gonna be accredited in 17029, 14065, 14064 part 3. How do accreditation bodies are seeing this, and maybe related to IOP? Is there something that you guys have discussed? Thank you.
I started and you complemented, because I want to go back here on this scheme, because I exactly avoid to use level 3, level 4, level 5, because this is one important point under discussion, but later Anna will update on the status of the discussion. Because now it's quite clear that this is level 3. It's quite clear that this is level 5, and in my view that this is level 4. So I have no doubt on it. In my view, now there is a discussion, but maybe the discussion already have a decision, but an interesting discussion if the 65 should be here as level 3 or should be here as a level 4. Because from some perspective, it's a sectorial application. But from another perspective, it's a requirement for the verification, for the verification body. It's not for the process. So in my view, is a 3.5 level. It's not 3, it's not 4. But Anne, please, you may update on the discussion.
Yeah. Hi, Mary-Luz. When we were talking about all the different levels within the working group, originally I very much wanted to keep 14065 at level 3, just to keep it more simple. Because one, if you have 17029 and you have something that's not environmental in nature, it makes it easier to then identify, the accreditation requirements for the cab. And then from there, levels 4 and 5 don't get so muddled, right? That's my concern right now, is you move 14065 down to level 4, which is what is proposed currently. Then you have 64-3 also sitting at level 4. Then potentially currently you have the Corsia ETM sitting at level 4. Then level 5, you have 64-1 and the Corsia SARP annex. But then if we add, let's say we add green bonds next year to this equation, then we have more sitting in group 4, and more as more of these programs come. Say we have circular economy or something like that, and then we have a verification standard, and that's sitting in level 4. So my concern is level 4 is going to start to get very for lack of a better word, jumbled and confusing. And that's the same question that, you know, you have. We're trying to figure that out now. So it, just thinking about like a certificate of accreditation, right? What would a CAB want to see to be able to communicate to their stakeholders what exactly they're accredited to do? Would likely have 17029 on it, on the, you know, the main page. And then the scope of accreditation, we could have 14065 for environmental information. And then from there, I think you have to delineate the activities. So we have things like validation of project level assertions, verification of project level assertions, which is different than inventory, right? So we already do this to a certain extent. But then we'd be thinking about adding agreed upon procedures, or verification of use of proceeds in green debt instruments, or verification of plastic reduction goals. I mean, you name it, it could be there, but the scoping is going to have to be rethought, right? Because now it's very applicable to GHG. So we have scopes, primarily most of our AB scopes for GHG are based on the CDM scopes of accreditation at some level. You know, that's what all the voluntary markets have used, those 15 scopes or 14 scopes, I can't remember. So now, you know, one of those scopes, for example, is forestry, right? This is a good example for forest reductions, for conservation of forest stock. So then if you add this kind of data aggregation exercise, where a verifier is now going out and looking at a roll-up of all of this data from different parcels of land, well, that's slightly different, right? That's not, it's similar, but it's not the same thing as going to a project site and looking at one instance of a project. So you're looking at a lot of use of technology in terms of some of these new programs are using technologies like blockchain and things like that to roll up that data. So the verifier is then handed a package and expected to go through that roll up and look at it. Well, this is an example because in my mind, do I keep that under the current scope? Do I keep that under just land use and forestry and it's a verification activity? Or do I need to add a new category and say aggregation or, you know, verification of aggregate project data? And that could also get into AUP, because there could be parts of that data that they would not want to put a level of assurance on. So I think all of these things are very unanswered at this stage. You almost have to map out all of the instances and then start at the top, right? So you'd have 17029. Then you could say you have environmental, non-environmental, and maybe go from there. And then the scope of accreditation, I think that is one of the areas where the ABs are going to have to come back and create something that is more akin to what's happened in the 17021 world or those types of MDs where they actually help the AB with the scope. Because if we don't have some consistency around scoping, I think everyone's gonna have different certificates saying different things, and it's gonna get really confusing. That's not an answer to your question, but it's a clarification
of the
situation. Struggle. Yeah.
It's good to know that the final decision is not taken. So you say that the majority of the most probably solution will be to move to the level 4, but it's not the final decision. So maybe Mariluz, you may share your point of view within your regional group of accreditation body, because I think this is the point where we need to discuss in this moment with the accreditation body, because it's very important, even in terms of multilateral agreement. because I'm very worried of a multilateral agreement this moment in 7229, including all the 40 or 65 activities. There is a huge amount of activities. So even in terms of peer evaluation, you may imagine the number of verification, experience, competence to cover all 7229, including all environmental activities. So it's a very, very crucial point in my view.
Thank you for the clarification. And yeah, it's like a really one of the most important points that we have to address with these new changes. And I wanted to see your point of view. I'm happy that there is, I mean, that I'm not lost, but I think I feel lost in this matter. But yeah, as you were saying at first, at the end, we want to make sure that the BBB is competent to verify, validate something of any program. So at the end, that's something that we have to like take into consideration when we do this this map of accreditation scope, because in some way there are some knowledges and abilities, I mean competence, that is like a base, like and then we have to think like, okay, what is like the extra that we have to evaluate, you know? Because as you're saying, if we keep going with level 4 and then we have to like do like another witnessing for every topic, but at the end it's like the same thing. That's something that we have to think about.
Yeah,
that's like what I'm trying to think in my mind,
think
because it's already complex, so it's gonna be really expensive. So
exactly.
it's like, so
exactly.
yeah, like how do I put in my head? Thank you.
I mean, I feel like we already have so many different programs. At least in North America, we have many different programs. So now we're talking about adding new types of things, and you know, like this last week was spending time with a federal program where they wanted to link this clean fuel regulation to CORSIA, and they want to use some of the same things, the approved schemes I mentioned. You know, they want to say, well, we can use those approved schemes too. And then under the scheme, they have 17065 for the sustainability of the fuel. But we also want to add this verification component. So then as an accreditation body, you're almost, I mean, what I'm thinking is, okay, maybe you say you have to have accreditation for both to do that type of work. I don't know, but some of this I think is going to get into the confusion of where is the product certification stop and where does the verification begin? Because there are many cabs that have experience in both, but as you know, these programs are highly technical. I mean, look at CORSIA, look at the clean fuel, you know, modalities of the CORSIA. These are highly technical programs, and unless you have people who really have studied them, you're not going to get a good result. And in terms of the MLA, I think they're just going to have to stop at level 3, because honestly, I don't think they're going to be able to train peer evaluators on all this stuff, because there's just too much. Sorry, just an opinion.
But maybe, Mariluz, you may participate to the future GAG working group where all accreditation bodies are welcome. And now, in particular, that is a video conference, so all experience, I expect that it is welcome for this kind of discussions, very, very useful. I want to underline, oh no, sorry. Are there any other questions before Yes, sure.
I have a question for Vincenzo. Hello, Vincenzo. Based on your experience, how companies have reacted to this new approach, the agree upon procedures? They found it like an opportunity for your experience, or?
Okay, hi. I try to answer to you. Well, to be honest, we had just 2 applications of IOP, and in both cases was the clients to ask us to apply this kind of application. So the request arrived from clients, and for them is an opportunity because, for example, they use the IOP in indirect emissions, if I remember well, category 4 and category 5 in GHG inventory, where the quality of data were not so high and so good. So for them, it was the first year of GHG inventory, of calculation of GHG inventory. So now it was really a good opportunity. In our part, in our point of view, it was also a good experience because without application of IOP, it was not possible to give a level of assurance. So it was in the end to do a good opportunity to do a mixed engagement and apply the verification for all the other part of the inventory and IOP just for category 4 and 5. Of course, I'm speaking about new version of 6.4 part 1. Okay, I don't know if I answered.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vincenzo. I don't know if there are other questions.
Yes, I would like to ask a question about AUP.
Okay, Maureen, if you may speak louder because your voice is quite...
Sure.
Okay, great.
I struggle with AU. I struggle to understand AUP because it's in the presentation it said intended user, but Vincenzo said client, and I'm struggling with that because the 14065, the FDIS clearly states that the statement should only be used by the intended user who have agreed upon the procedure. But I don't understand, can that be somebody else than the client? Because if I'm the intended user, I cannot agree upon the procedure. If the public is the intended user, you cannot agree upon the procedure. So I don't understand how that is supposed to work. I don't see it.
I try to give my first answer, then Vincenzo and Anne may complement. So if there is a program, the program may specify that is acceptable and when is acceptable. Obviously, if you are in a program where it's clear that the intended user does not accept the AUP, for example, if we say in UATS, there is no way to use the AUP in UTS because it's quite clear that it has to be everything under verification with a reasonable level of assurance. But if there are a specific program where this is allowed, I don't see a particular problem. And then I go back to the example of Walmart. So we need to be transparent that if Walmart will ask for a verification of the GHG inventory according to 64 part 1, it's impossible to issue a reasonable level of assurance. I would say also a limited level of assurance on some emission where they don't have any kind of control of the data. So we need to recognize the reality. I don't believe that this could be applied all the time, but we need to recognize where there are situations where it's impossible to express assurance. And then we need to discuss between verification body, accreditation body, in my view, in particular, to define the threshold, to define the border when AUP is acceptable and where it's not acceptable. But for sure, the program shall be, the program is the first organization that may address the use of AUP, in my view. I don't know if Anna or Vincenzo has something to add.
No, okay. You were clear in your explanation, so I have no more to add.
Anne, do you have
Yeah.
anything? Yeah.
I agree. I think there's going to have to be more sharing of experience on this, and also maybe some, I mean, obviously the program here is very important, but also the experience of the verification validation body to be able to say whether or not they can embark on a certain engagement and whether or not the criteria is appropriate. Because I think that's maybe the question that AUP brings for me is, if there was a client bringing you something that they wanted you to use AUP on, and maybe it was not appropriate, how are you going to police that, you know, under an accreditation system?
It's a question for me.
Who? Where?
It was a question for me, Anne.
It was just an open question. I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts for sure. So say a company came to you and they said, this is what we want to do, and this is, you know, what we want you to look at, and you were saying, well, maybe there's already a program for that. Why don't you just use this program? I mean, I assume those conversations would happen as part of the review, right?
Okay.
Yes, I don't see if there are other reaction on this point. So yes, I agree with Anne. I don't see any particular problem in this direction. Any other question? One point, going back to the Angelo request in terms of extension of scope 4065 and the Mariluz point in connection with level 3, level 4. So it's interesting to think that probably in the next future, the EPD, Environmental Product Declaration, that is an environmental information that has a, I would say, a large amount of activities in Europe, will be under the same standard 4065. So you may imagine that UETS, carbon footprint of product, carbon footprint organization according to 64 part 1, the project 64 part 2, EPD, all these activities under a single standard that is 4065. So I think this is an interesting evolution in terms of market. I don't know, Angelo, if you have any comment or if somebody else want to comment.
I think also about additional standard related to the verification of sustainability report. I think that you know the GRI, the Global Report Initiative. You know that at the moment the verifiers use the IESA 3000 like verification standard, but at the moment, my knowledge, there is not an accreditation covered activity of this type of verification. So I think that there is that could be a lot of additional verification market activity that can be moved under this type of accreditation. In my experience, the Global Reporting Initiative in general, the sustainability report or environmental report can be an interesting area that can be moved under this type of the scheme of accreditation. So, but I think that it cannot be very easy to move all this type of market, because under this umbrella of of this accreditation, because some part of the verification market is addressed in different area of approach that is very similar for this type of approach, but to have a common vision of accreditation of all this type of activity won't be very easy. Yeah, I think that is a long time, that we need a long time of time to put together a common vision of accreditation of all these type of claim.
Yeah, you're right. We are in the big evolution now.
Yeah.
You mentioned one area when there is the 40/16, if I'm not wrong with the number, that is a guideline for the verification of the environmental report. It's a guideline at the moment, but then will be very easy for a program to say this guideline is transformed in a standard or is a requirements. So it's still another point.
Yeah, I think also about the CDP, you know, CDP has a part of activity that can be verified by a verifier. And if you check the criteria that can be used by the verification body to verify the environmental, the GHG data under CDP, there is a list, very long list of type of standard that can be used. 4564 part 3 is a 3000 and then so on, a lot of standards. So there is a big part of the market that at the moment recognize a lot of standards to verify inventory data, financial data, and so on. So I think that is interesting to have a common vision, to have an order, a system, a global system to verify environmental data in general, or in environmental report, or in the mandatory verification. And so in the next year, we have a lot of work to do together to move in this direction, new direction.
You remember me that I didn't introduce you. So Angelo Ferlini is responsible for all the sustainability environmental area, I would say, or maybe more, Angelo, in SGS.
SGS Italy.
SGS Italy. Marie-Luz is the accreditation body in Costa Rica, and Maureen is the accreditation body in the Netherlands, RVA. So sorry if I didn't introduce you. Now Carla Sanz from Accredia raised the hand. So please, Carla.
Hi everyone. I don't know, because I missed 5 minutes of the conversation. I don't know if you have raised this question, but Anne said that IIF is going to make a survey to us for new activities with ISO 17029. But I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have some accreditation bodies from all over the world to ask you if you have already started to have some accreditation procedures for ISO 17029, and also to verifiers if they have already some activities and they wish to apply in conformity to ISO 17029. Thanks. By the way, I'm Accredia from Italy, and we are starting with ethical claims. So this will be our first scheme, but we don't have all the documents in place for ISO 17029. So I'm just looking for some inspiration or help.
We should talk, Carla. So we have similar to that, this program that I mentioned, which is the low carbon fuel, which is kind of combining 17065 and 14065. And then the other one, which I think will get into ethical claims, is the potential plastics program, which is being launched under Vera. Vera is the carbon scheme, which I believe Accredia works with Vera as well. But they are in the public comment phases of the new plastics program. And this is part of a wider initiative to reduce plastic waste, to eliminate plastic waste from waste streams, and to recognize corporate actions to reduce plastic waste. But it looks a lot like a crediting program, but it also gets into the social aspects of the people who are handling the waste. So that is kind of, I think, going to be the first area where we have to start to think about 17029. So it's probably akin to ethical claims, but it gets into the actual socioeconomic aspects of the waste handlers. So we're trying to wrap our arms around that and see what would be the best design for an accreditation program there.
Okay, thanks. I didn't ask you about the fuel scheme because I thought that it was very complex to have like a combination of our products plus verification. Because thinking about the scope of accreditation, I thought, oh my God. So, but it's a good, I think it's a good activity and a good experience maybe to share in future.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let me check if there are any further questions.
How about Costa Rica? There must be some new things coming out of Costa Rica, no?
Mariluz, is for you.
Okay, new stuff, because we have been working, as you know, on the carbon neutral for organization, which is verification. But the DCC, the Office of Climate Change of Costa Rica from the Minister of Environment, is working, I think almost finishing, a new scheme for carbon product footprint, but it's gonna be like neutrality with, I don't know how can I say it in English, Daniele, but it's yeah, it's using 14067, but the problem of the minister wants to make it neutrality too, the same with the scheme of organizations. So they're taking into consideration all these new standards, and taking into consideration the fact that they are not the new versions of some standards, and how can these BBBs can be accredited with us, using what we have now, the standards that we have now, and also having the future standards, how it's gonna be mixed. It's pretty much done. They are working some of the, I think Sergio Cotto is here. He's working with the BBBs in Costa Rica, like with 3 of them, with this new scheme. And also, I mean, ECA has been having lots of how do you say it, workshops with, in this case, with Daniele. We have one in carbon footprint. We have one with Veronica Garcia, that maybe some of you know, with the new standards. But yeah, the complexity is weird, because here the scheme owner is developing, really fast, but the accreditation skeleton, like the scheme thing that we're talking about, is not ready yet. It's like we have so much blurred things, but we can definitely share with some of you when the scheme, because I think it's public. So yeah, I think it will be really interesting. So the accreditation bodies to, you know, get together, at least like the ones who are here, we have the contact, and see how are you guys gonna like work this out. We have this plan, but there's so, as I say, so many blurred things that we want to like have clear like as soon as possible, because we have to open this scheme. Is happening, is like, and now it's coming, 14065 is coming at the end of the year, so we have those, all those things. So yeah,
I'm thinking that we need to plan maybe some other meetings in 6 months or more from now, maybe where we may share your experience with Sergio, Mario Lucedi, and Laura, and to learn by your experience and to share your experience, because it's always interesting in this moment where there are interesting programs moving in different parts of the world, but network is important to share the approach. Okay, we are at 5:30, so at the end of our time. I don't know if there is any urgent or hot topics for the last question, but I see that everybody should be quite tired after 3 years of meeting, a couple of hours, sorry, I'm very tired, a couple of hours of meeting. And yes, I'd like to thank you, everybody, for the participation. It was really interesting to see the experience of the verification body and different accreditation body, and have this kind of meeting to know better what's happening in other part of the world. So we committed to organize something more in the next months, maybe 6 months, 10 months from now, to have some further appointments to follow the evolution of 3029 and the 40065. I hope the new revision of 40065. So thank you, everybody. Thanks in particular to ANAB and Vicenzo Miceli for the very great presentation and interesting point of discussion. We plan to have another meeting in November, but I don't want to tell you at the moment exactly the topics, because still under discussion. But keep in contact, have a look to our news, and then you will see what will be the next meeting. Thanks again, everybody, and ciao.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, bye. Nice seeing all of you. Take care.
you.
Everyone stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Daniel, thank you very much. I am Anara from Kazakhstan.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, I am from Kazakhstan, and I am glad to participate here. And I think that my colleagues, they are participating with me too here. I think that they support my opinion, and I want to say that this standard 17029 is new for Kazakhstan, and we don't have enough experience on this standard, and I think that further our cooperation on starting of the standard, on discussing some questions on the GHG will really will be useful, and we will use this experience in our work in accreditation of verification bodies. And I'm glad to see here Anne, who was in our Kazakhstan for nearly 2 years ago. Yes, Anne, or not? And I think that our participating here is useful for us. Thank you very much. And Carla, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Have a nice dinner, because now it's dinner time for you. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye. Bye.